Honorable judges, today this House will abolish the minimum wage requirement to vote, replacing it with the basic political literacy test. We believe that this debate is about what should qualify someone to participate in the democracy. Should it be an arbitrary measure like age, or should it be the ability to make an informed decision about how a country is governed? Let me begin with framing. Under our model, we removed the fixed voting age and instead allow any individual to vote regardless of age, as long as they pass a basic political literacy test. This test will assess the fundamental knowledge, such as the understanding of how elections work, the roles of government branches, and the impact of the policies. This is not about ideology or opinions, but about ensuring a minimum level of informed participation. At 18, individuals are automatically guaranteed the right to vote, regardless of whether they understand the political system. At the same time, younger individuals who may be highly informed and engaged are excluded entirely. The stakeholders of this debate are young people who are currently disconnected despite being affected by political decisions. Secondly, whose collective decisions shape governance. And third, the democratic institutions, which rely on informed participation to function effectively. Am I lagging? Oh. So I would like to present two main arguments. Firstly, we believe that this policy creates a more informed and responsible electorate. In the status quo, voting rights are granted without any requirements of political understanding, and this means individuals can vote without knowing how policies affect them, how institutions function, or what different political actors represent. This weakens the quality of democratic decision-making. By introducing a basic literacy test, we can ensure that all voters meet a minimum standard of understanding. This does not guarantee perfect decisions, but significantly reduces uninformed voting based on misinformation, populism, and superficial narratives. For example, a 16-year-old who actively follows politics and understands how government works would be allowed. For example, a 6-year-old who actively follows politics and understands how government works would be allowed to vote, while an uninformed adult would have to learn before participating. This creates a system that rewards engagement and knowledge rather than simply age. Secondly, this policy is more fair and inclusive than the current system. The minimum age requirement is one and imperfect tool. It assumes that all individuals above a certain age are capable, and all below it are not. In reality, political awareness does not develop at a fixed point. There are many young people who are directly affected by policies, education, climate change, and digital regulation, yet they have no say in decisions that shape their future. At the same time, some older voters may lack even basic political understanding, but are still given full voting rights. Our model corrects this imbalance. It includes those who are capable, regardless of age, and ensures that participation is based on readiness rather than age. This also strengthens the legitimacy of democracy. When voters are informed, elections outcomes carry greater credibility, and public trust in democratic systems can improve. Ultimately, the question in this debate is simple. Should voting be based on when you're born, or on whether you're prepared to make an informed decision? We believe democracy is the strongest when participation is both inclusive and informed. Our model achieves both. For these reasons, please vote for us, Judge. Thank you.
To start this debate, I would like to first introduce my team's arguments. I will be addressing the disadvantages of the political literacy test, while the second speaker will talk about the subjective gatekeeping. Okay, now I would like to address the key flaws in the opposition's case. The offensive team argues that a minimum voting age assumes everyone above the age is capable, but this misunderstands how democratic systems work. The age requirement is not meant to perfectly measure individuals' capability. Rather, it is a fair, objective, universal threshold that avoids subjective judgment that I will expand on later in my case. No subsystem will perfectly assess political maturity, but the key problem is whether the system is more just. A political literacy test does not solve this problem. It replaces a simple and equal rule with a subjective exam that can be influenced by bias, wording, and unequal access to education, and I'll explain that further on to my case. Okay. So that means people could be excluded, not because the lack of capability, but because they perform poorly under test conditions. Therefore, even if the age system is imperfect, it is still fair and more reliable than the test-based system. Moving on to my first substantive, replacing the minimum voting age with a literacy test, political literacy test, creates a system that is prone to bias and unfairness. Why do we say this? Someone has to design tests, decide which topics are included, determine the passing mark, and define what level of political knowledge is enough to earn the right to vote. This creates significant risk of bias, whether intentional or unintentional, because the tests may favor certain educational backgrounds or perspective. Because the tests may favor certain education backgrounds or perspective, more importantly, political literacy tests cannot accurately measure qualities such as maturity, critical thinking, or life experiences, all of which are important when making voting decisions. On the other hand, someone who is thoughtful and responsible may fail the test due to stress, misunderstanding a question, or lack of knowledge of a specific topic, yet still being fully capable of making a meaningful political choice. Therefore, this test does not truly determine whether someone is a responsible voter or not. Why is setting a minimum age better though? A minimum voting age may not be a perfectly measure maturity or political knowledge, but it is still the most fair and reliable system available. The key reason is that it is completely objective. Age is clear, universal standard that cannot be influenced by bias, interpretation, or testing conditions. In contrast, a political literacy test creates far more serious problems because it creates someone to decide what knowledge is enough to vote, which inevitably introduces subjectivity and potentially political bias. How is this good for our economy? So, our case, we believe that our case is more beneficial for our economy, while their case is not as good for our economy. The affirmative team may argue that age is arbitrary, and it is a fair point and an equal one. But this also requires a test may sound more accurate in theory, but like in practice, it risks excluding people that's capable of making a good choice. So therefore, even if age system is imperfect, it is still superior because it avoids manipulation, ensures equal access, and protects voting as a universal right rather than an qualification. Therefore, I am proud to propose. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to start my speech by poking some holes in the previous speaker's argument. So she states that political test doesn't record all the things that people need, such as thoughtfulness and kindness. This argument does not completely make sense because the only main trait that people need to vote is the understanding of the political system. Moreover, when you turn of age, that doesn't mean that you automatically gain political knowledge, and you don't automatically gain the traits that she talked about, as in kindness or thoughtfulness. Although the political tests do not measure those traits, it doesn't mean that being of age automatically gets those traits, and voting doesn't really need those traits anyways. So that moves on to my first point, that the question simply boils down to if age or understanding of the political system should be prioritized for the right to vote. And as proposition, we believe that the fundamental understanding of the system should be prioritized over the age. So why is this beneficial? As long as they have an understanding of how the government works, they should be able to contribute to the country. First of all, this motivates young people to also contribute to the democracy and forces everyone to take responsibility of their country's political system. No matter what age you are, if you have an understanding of the system, you should be granted the right to vote because it is the most beneficial and direct way. If individuals have a basic understanding, they can participate meaningfully in the political process. Some of us vote without knowing the context of the situation, whether the person itself or the current political situation, which leads to a lot of inaccuracies in voting. Because of this, citizenship should be based on capability and awareness, not just age. Learning how the government works also builds responsibility. Moreover, if you truly understand a political system, most of the times you will be of age anyways. So having a political literacy test is just to narrow down and filter out and to be more accurate. Another perspective is that the current voting system creates a political void where young people are told that their opinions do not matter until they turn of age, which they turn 18, which can contribute to low voter turnouts among young adults. The argument for change is that trying the right to vote to a basic political literacy test would fundamentally change civic education. So schools, parents, and communities would have strong incentives to teach young people how government works and how to engage responsibly with political issues. It doesn't matter how old you are. This motivates schools and parents, right? From a young age, democracy knowledge, how the systems work, should be a basic knowledge, which in the long run will be very beneficial to the political system. So in conclusion, we believe that a political literacy test is an accurate way to narrow down the people that understand the system, which results in a more sustainable political system in the long run. Thank you.
This debate is about whether democracy is improved by replacing a simple universal age threshold with a political literacy test that determines who is allowed to vote. Good afternoon, adjudicator and fellow debaters. I'd like to first rebut the affirmative team and then move on to my substantives. Their second affirmative has stated that political knowledge is basic knowledge. However, our team has demonstrated that political knowledge is gained through life and experience, and at the age of 18, it is a threshold where you have gained experience of things and the political system, so you'd gain a good understanding. A teen wouldn't have as much as a grasp of an 18-year-old on the knowledge, whether on who to vote or what is better for the society. As well, they also have stated, the affirmative also have stated that the understanding of political systems at like teenagers. However, at the age of 18, you would have experienced more, as I already said, and my team has demonstrated. So moving on to my substantives. Firstly, I would like to talk about how the threshold of 18-year-old of being able to vote at the 18-year-old is a much easier system to manage, as a fixed age is objective compared to just to the exam, which could have a lot of issues of implementation or such as cost within the government and many other factors, as my first speaker has already stated. It would be, as I said, just a fixed age would be much easier than administer for an exam. And this exam could cost a lot of money for both the government and the voters, and it wouldn't place much benefit towards either side. This would just make the voting system more complex rather than actually benefiting it. And currently in the system, it's illegal for you to vote blindly, so you have to already have prior knowledge and to vote on who you actually want to know. And voters should be yes.
You stated that people can't vote blindly, but that's exactly what people that turn 18 do and don't have a basic understanding of political knowledge. They're just voting blindly. Can you explain that, please?
As I have said just before, at 18, they have reached maturity. They're no longer they're basically out the public as a legal adult. So therefore, being as you said, that they wouldn't they'll be blind voting. How blind voting isn't very often doesn't happen very often, and it's also illegal. So fines apply when you vote illegally. And moving on to my other substantive on how these tests could be some citizens might have incentives to purposely fail the test and to avoid voting, because voting is a very long and annoying process for many people. So some people would like manipulate their own manipulate the test to like make them think they're not ready for the election. However, they actually have the ability to vote, as many 18-year-olds already have a good understanding of the system, which referring back to how at the age of 18 they are already getting a good grasp of the society where they are and where they live it. Therefore, that the basic structure of having over 18-year-olds vote is much simpler and much easier compared to the what the affirmative is pushing for. And the affirmative is assuming that passing a political literacy test means someone is capable of making an independent political decision. However, as the negative, we strongly disagree with this, that political knowledge is not the same as political independence. And younger teens also are more vulnerable towards the public, as they might have external factors such as pressure from family, or some like having political people giving more benefits towards teens to have teens voting for them, which would make the government system more unfair for the government system. And even if these smaller teenagers do understand how government works, they are still not fully mature and wouldn't be likely to very understand everything that they would choose or do. And I cannot be part of the past. Thank you.
Good morning, Judge. As the third speaker of the proposition, my goal is to summarize my teammates' points as well as to rebut the opposition's points and show why their points are untrue. So firstly, let's address the opposition's main philosophical perspective. They argue that political knowledge is actually gained through life experience, and that an 18-year-old person understands who to vote for a better teenager. That's a flawed assumption. So turning 18 doesn't mean you have a political knowledge. Like you don't just inject a political knowledge into a person's the 18-year-old brain. So as my first teammate argued, age is actually an arbitrary proxy for maturity. Under the current system, as an adult who votes completely at random or just trust random information has access to this voting system. And while they're politically engaged, and a highly informed 14-year-old has a really has zero to say in this voting. So we prioritize those people with verified capability over the birth rate, over the birth and your year. And so as our team established youth are actually people who are deeply impacted by long-term government decisions and also choices. They are regarding education or debt, family debt, and also climate change. So when young people work, they pay taxes, and they are usually restricted by the law, and denying their representation means that just because their age is a violation of the rules, our model ensures that those who understand the system get to have a vote and also shape the system based on their own experience, regardless of their youth. So secondly, the opposition complains that complains that a fixed age is cheaper to manage, and that administrating an exam costs too much money, and that citizens in countries with the voting with voting will also purposefully fail the test to avoid fines. So firstly, let's look at the argument about costs. The opposition claims that testing makes the system too complicated and it's too complex. But uh, as our team proved, time voting rights to a basic literacy test is can completely change the education system. So schools and communities will also naturally integrate this when integrate this choice and function to their existing curriculum. And testing basic knowledge uh of the politics and government isn't really expensive. It's actually just a basic investment for the health of our democracy and the health. Yeah. So secondly, as our team, as the opposition mentioned, that people will intentionally fail the test to avoid voting. If a citizen is really indifferent to the future of their own country, they would just purposefully fail test to avoid debt. So they're exactly the type of those stupid voters who actually just degrades democratic choices under the current system. So just allowing them to opt out through the test, we can actually just filter out the completely the not engaged students. So as our team mentioned, this drastically improves the quality of democratic outcomes. Therefore, the opposition defends a law that actually just disables the passionate young stakeholders to vote and choosing the administrative convenience over the true democratic representation for their own country. So while us, the proposition, we stand for a really positive and enlightened and true democracy that actually changes the education values, the system, the democracy into a really into a genuine and authentic future where the nation is decided by those who actually understand it and have real experience to it. So so we vote for the motion. Thank you.
Government has always been saying that, the test should be measured by who's smart, not by age. And they even used the example that a 16-year-old can be smarter than a 30-year-old. But democracy is not based on who's the smartest. If it were, government would have to test the adults as well. Voting is a right because people are governed and they live in a democratic society. Okay, not a reward for political knowledge. Age is imperfect, but it's clear and automatic. This test is dangerous and subjective. In my speech, I will prove why this is the case. Firstly, the government has mentioned that this policy creates more informed and responsible elections. But that relies on the false assumption that makes it so that passing a political literacy test makes someone a responsible voter. The literacy test only measures active recall and people's ability to memorize basic political facts and their ability to take a test. This excludes a major stakeholder. I'm sure there's lots of people who are not that great at taking tests, but they have lots of political knowledge. This unfairly excludes them from the political scheme. Also, responsible voting requires judgment, independence, and the ability to meaningfully weigh against policies and consequences. This test does not actually measure what people actually know, while also excluding people who don't have the confident ability to take tests, you know, like and the other reason why this fails is because like it creates a dangerous incentive. You know, like political groups, schools, parents, and governments have reasons to shape how people prep for the test. Like since people want to take the test, they want to vote, they will seek help and guidance. But these systems each have their own perspective, like perspective means and systems, and these can influence children into agreeing with their point of view on politics. Like this actually makes elections less responsible as well, as voters may like pass the test while being shaped in the political point of view of whoever helped them pass it. Like they also mentioned that it motivates the young to take responsibility, but like their voting test does not make young people more responsible. Like it gives them the instead it gives them the incentive to study more to pass. Like however, we say that real responsibility stop. Real political responsibility comes from long-term civic understanding, education, discussion, debate, rather than on our exam. Like, even if Gov is correct that some young can get motivated, but like that does not justify the policy. Like, instead, it only motivates people who are confident to take the test rather than like everyone else. Like it creates inequality for the future, as like people who can't take the test well will not take the test. Like the benefit is also not worth the harm. Like it motivates responsibility by threatening a democratic right, like dangerous dictatorship way to teach citizenship, as people feel they must earn respect their voice from the state. Like this breaks democracy. Like the government now uses fear to manipulate people into like taking the test, and they threaten a democratic right in the process. For these reasons, I cannot be prouder to oppose.
In this debate, the main issue is whether a political literacy test can truly measure an individual's capability and qualities as a voter. Can a political literacy test truly measure an individual's capability? Our team has clearly argued that it cannot. A person's capability to make thoughtful political decisions cannot be accurately captured through a test that is inherently vulnerable to bias in its design, question selection, and marking. Therefore, even if the intention is to identify more informed voters, the method itself is unreliable and unfair, as it measures test performance rather than genuine political judgment or real-world decision-making ability. How would we know if a test contains bias? The offensive team have never truly responded to this question, as bias in the test could manipulate individuals' choices, especially younger stakeholders, such as younger children who may be more vulnerable to leading and misleading question framing. Therefore, the problem is not just whether bias exists, but it's also extremely difficult to detect and control, meaning that the test could be easily influence outcome in unfair and unpredictable ways. Voting for a leader requires more than factual political knowledge. It requires judgments about qualities such as responsibility, integrity, and how a candidate is supposed to treat people. These are not things that can be reliability measured through a political literacy test. A test may assess what someone knows about politics, but it cannot measure whether they can detect kindness, responsibility, leadership, and long-term decision-making skills in a real-life context. And in fact, leadership judgment often comes from life experiences, values, and personal reasoning, not just from a test, not memorized information. Therefore, the test fails to capture what actually matters in voting, which is the ability to make informed and reasonable, responsible choices about who should lead a country. Therefore, I'm proud to oppose. Thank you.
The opposition's favorite point in this entire debate is that the test doesn't achieve something, it doesn't do something, it doesn't give the necessary traits, it doesn't give kindness or thoughtfulness, But there's a major flaw in this entire argument, is that being of age doesn't guarantee what the test can't do, right? This is something that the test can't do does not, being of age doesn't guarantee. So Judge, let's compare the two status quos. On their side of the world, anyone of age can vote, which creates a political gap in where people that aren't of age can't vote, and political knowledge isn't viewed as importantly as maturity. On our side, the political system is backed heavily by people that truly have understanding of the democratic system, that have deep knowledge of the system itself. This weighs heavily over their world. Since our status quo is much more sustainable compared to the other side, it will run longer in the long run, and we have more compressed and concentrated voters. It is simply quality over quantity over the people that can vote. So why should we win? All of their points are superficial and shallow, and their main point of political independence, which is measured by age, isn't backed up properly and is extremely shallow. So in conclusion, turning of age almost has no connection to political voting, and a political literacy test doesn't just filter out the people that truly care and understand, it also motivates young people to learn about politics and forces citizens to take responsibility of the democratic system. So for the reasons above, I think we should win, and I proudly propose. Thank you.